Hello, welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Joseph Marks, and I'm here today with a fascinating guest, Ric Prado. I hope I'm saying that correct, Rick. We didn't have a chance to talk beforehand. He had a career as a covert CIA operative traveling the world, uh, from everything to the Contras in Nicaragua to the war on terror. He has released a book recently, Black Ops: The Life of a CIA Shadow Warrior. And we are delighted to have him here today. We'll hear about his history and also his take on recent events in Ukraine. Rick, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. So, before we get into the book, I want to talk about the events of just this last week in Ukraine. You said this week that Putin's invasion of Ukraine was not surprising to you. Why is that?
Well, if you look at the Russian ethos, starting back even through before communism, but definitely after 1917, they're they have been an expansionistic, controlling element, and that is their philosophy. I mean, we had Stalin, we had Khrushchev, and now we have Putin, and everybody else in between. So it was no surprise to me because that's what is expected of communism. They want world domination, and they want to take away the basic rights of freedoms.
You bring up an interesting point. I mean, you spent the first part of your career as a real Cold Warrior working in Nicaragua and elsewhere. Um, how is the Putin regime we're dealing with today different from the Soviet regime that you spent so much time combating?
Well, I mean, he's very aggressive at this stage, but until recently, it was textbook. It was the same thing. Using Cuba as a surrogate, they would bring in weapons to Nicaragua. That's one of the operations that I interdicted. And some of those weapons were also going to El Salvador to try to foment an insurgency there. So, they have been involved in Venezuela, they have been involved in Bolivia, they have been involved in a lot of other places. So none of this is new. It is what they do.
If Putin is successful in occupying Ukraine, should we expect him to stop there, or is the goal to reform the old Soviet Union?
I would imagine that he's going to lick his wounds if he's lucky enough to take the Ukraine completely, and then he'll stop there temporarily. We call that creeping normalcy. They take a piece of something and they wait for the world to forget what they did, and then they can do it again. And sadly, our attention span in the Western world is pretty much that of a gnat.
Uh, well put. The U.S. and the European Union have imposed some pretty punishing sanctions so far. Is there more that we should be doing?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm glad to see that there's more of a coalition on this, and it's not just the U.S. be running point on this, even though we are the lead. I think that there's a lot more that we could do without getting directly involved in the fight, providing them intelligence, providing them materials that they need. You know, logistics is what experts really practice, not tactics. So, we need to be able to resupply these individuals so they don't, the Ukrainian allies, so they don't end up like that Russian convoy that's stuck there on the road because they're out of food and out of fuel.
What's the CIA's role in all of this?
Well, obviously, I mean, with any country that is surrounding Russia the way it is, and that has been on the kind of threat that Ukraine has been, we have been, I'm confident that we are good partners with them in the intelligence collection in the sense of teaching them what to do, preparing them, sharing with them the things that are applicable. And a more stiffening angle is using some of our trained paramilitary guys, whether it's from our own agency or our special operations forces, to train up the quality of the Ukrainian soldier, making them a better soldier, better equipped, better trained, and then with a lot more intelligence so they can act on it.
You said this week that you don't believe there are CIA special forces operating in Ukraine right now, but that back in your day, they might have been. They might have been there for months doing training. What's
Yeah,
changed, and what would
well,
go ahead?
yeah. What the reality is that I am sure, I'm confident, and I hope that it was the case that our guys have been in the Ukraine, training and providing intelligence and providing support. They could continue to do that, but not from the front lines, obviously, because it's not, we're not ready for that, or should we be even considering? So yeah, they've been involved for months, if not years.
So, get into your book. What is a shadow warrior?
We work in the shadows. We are unsung heroes. That is the impetus for me writing the book, was that I got very, very tired of seeing how my agency is maligned, and more importantly, how my brethren are portrayed. We're always that maniacal assassin, backstabbing, double dealing, doing things illegally behind enemies' back, and movies like yeah, American May I Made, and that hurts me because Joseph, we have 137 stars on our wall of men and women who sacrificed their lives for God and country, unsung heroes. The majority of those stars are actually anonymous. And some of those, a third of those stars are post 9/11. And some of the people after 9/11, I personally knew they were my colleagues. So I believe that we owe them a debt of honor to at least be able to portray them in a more realistic light. And that's what Black Ops is real CIA operations, as sexy as they may be, but they're still real, but they're not Jason Bourne. And they're done by real CIA operations officers.
Why has the picture that the average American has of what the CIA does and what covert actions are, why is that distorted in your mind?
Well, the my agency is phobic of the media, which is a mistake. We need to deal with things in a positive way, and by us not talking to them about the things that we can talk, it leaves a vacuum that Hollywood media fills in, and that's what people learn. People are educated by movies and TV shows and that kind of activities. That's all there is. So our agency has to do better. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I'm very proud and happy to see was that how much they literally left in my book, because there was a lot of things I thought they were going to cut out and they didn't. And I attribute to that to the fact that I, from the very beginning, told them what my goal was. My goal was to paint the agency in the proper light. Don't get me wrong. In the book, if something is wrong and it was done wrong, I do bring it out with names. But for my brethren to be represented to the Americans in a way that people go, if your son comes to you and says, Daddy, I want to join the CIA, your first reaction is not to send him to therapy.
Yeah, I mean, this really is a full, fascinating journey that takes you from Nicaragua to other Latin American nations to the war on terror. Can you tell us just a little inside baseball about the process of getting this through CIA approval? What are they looking for, and what do you have to do to get a book like this out?
Well, it's the production review board is a department in the agency that handles anything that is public. Like if I was going to do an op piece in the Washington Post, I have to clear it with them. Books, of course, they have to look at them and they send them to the subject matter experts. In the case of my book, as you stated, I started out in pro-insurgencies to counterinsurgencies to counterterrorism with Cold War stuff in between. So it has to go to different components. The chief of that component looks at what I am writing, and what they're looking for is anything that I say that can compromise former operations, or more importantly, the identities of some of our assets. And obviously, we took very good care of not doing that. And as you yourself just mentioned, one of the stories is an unnamed Latin American country, and the same thing with the radical Muslim African country where I was chief of station.
So the beginning of your career was in Nicaragua, working for the Contras, who were fighting against the socialist Sandinista government there. You say in the book that the Contras crusade became my crusade. What does that mean?
Well, you got to understand, I'm Cuban born. I saw what happened to my family and to my first country under the communist regime of Castro, the assassinations, the prosecutions, the destruction of family life, church, was the first thing that they closed down with our churches and kicked out the priests. So for me, seeing that as a 10-year-old and then coming to this wonderful country, turning 11 at an orphanage, um, I knew right away that this was the place to be. I saw what the difference is between post-Castro Cuba and what the United States has to offer. So fast forward now, I am the man in the camps. For the first 14 months of the 3 years that I was there, I was the only CIA officer allowed in the camps because I could pass off as a non-American. So imagine the pleasure of seeing individuals that have the same story that I had. I used to every night grab a cup of coffee and go sit down with some of the different Contras, not the leaders, the actual fighters, and ask them. I said, "Why are you here?" Not a single one said, "Well, I read Marx and Lenin, and I don't believe in that ideology." It was all personal. They raped my daughter. They closed down my church and beat up my priest. They forced conscripted my 15-year-old into service. It was all personal. It was very visceral. And for a kid to saw this monster, this octopus, as I call it, that is Russia, communism, and being in a position to help cut some of those tentacles, that was very rewarding. And I even though I was in very rough conditions there, well, for many many months, I never once woke up in the morning and said, "Oh man, what am I doing here?" or "I got to go to work." That never happened.
Yeah, you have this amazing personal story where, as you say, 10 years old, Castro came to power, seized your family coffee plantation, and you ended up coming to the United States alone before your family, spending 8 months in an orphanage. How did that form who you were and what you wanted to do? And then, for so many people who kind of came up during the Cold War, did you lose a sense of mission, or did the mission change after 1989?
Well, first of all, I do believe that that early experience was what forged my mettle to go in the direction that I eventually did. Both in the shock for a young man to have to weather an orphanage at the age of 10. I mean, I turned 11 in the orphanage, and where discipline was harsh and so were the fights. That started hammering my mettle and making it tougher. But at the end of the day, what really, really pushed it for me was I realized the debt of honor that I had to this country. My mom and dad paid the ultimate price of putting their only child on an airplane to a country that they've never been to or perhaps could never go to. And that sense of courage on the part of my parents, especially my dad, and seeing the contrast and then how when my parents came, how they became part of the American dream, and look at the career, the life that I've had. I couldn't. This could not be duplicated in any other country of the world. For me, the first thing was purpose. I have purpose, and I'm a firm believer in democracy, in the patriotism that we owe this country. To the topic that you asked about, did we take our eye off the ball we may pay more attention to communism than we should have? And the answer is yes to a degree, but that's with the benefit of hindsight. You have to understand that when terrorism came to our knocking on our doors, even before 9/11, we had the cold, we had the embassy bombings. Um, all these things really made us omnifocus on the problem. And the example that I give is, terrorism is like getting shot. Communism is like contracting cancer. In the first one, unless you treat it immediately and pay full attention to it, you're going to die. On the cancer, you have time, you have medical support, you have innovative capabilities, and hopefully you beat it after a period of time. So that became our problem. When we were seeing what was being done and suffering the consequences and getting intelligence that indicated that we're going to be getting more, our limited resources. Let's face it, every organization has limits in budget and limits in personnel. We had to do triage. So yes, primarily counterterrorism became our number one mission. But I assure you that my building never turned off our interest in Russia or in North Korea or in China or Iran. That is something that we do in spite of whatever hair on fire moment we're having.
Can you talk a little bit about what your daily life was like, working on these operations? in Nicaragua. You talk about sleeping in a jungle for 2 or 3 years. How does that change you? What was your day to day like?
Well, it would like I would spend Monday through Friday in a camp. I would go to two camps a week, Monday and Tuesday to one, travel on Wednesday to the next one, and do the same thing, and come back to the capital in Honduras on Saturday morning. Um, but it didn't change me any. On the contrary, it just actually gave me even more reasons to be proud of what and my colleagues are able to do for something that we believe in. So, for example, a jungle hammock it's a hammock that has a roof over it. So if it rains, you don't get too wet, and it's got mosquito netting, so you don't get the scorpions and the snakes and the mosquitoes. That was my bed Monday through Friday for the better part of 3 years. Then after that, I would get up. I would start training the guys, whether it was headspace and timing on a 50 cal, RPG-7 training, patrolling, zeroing in sniper rifles, and giving them the intelligence that we could provide about points of interest that they may be able to go downrange and exploit for us. And that was an all-day process. I mean, we worked incessantly, and then at night, like I mentioned, I would socialize with the Contras because that's what really floated my boat for being there. I felt in place and I felt appreciated.
So the this operation became controversial once the Iran Contra affair became out. Some Contras were accused of atrocities. You have said that those were a limited number of people. You called them, good, God-fearing people. Can you talk about what do you believe is misunderstood about the Contras this many
Well,
decades later?
it was absolutely, and it is a shame that it ended up how it ended. Although the program was successful, let's face it, we drove the Sandinistas, we forced the Sandinistas to have democratic elections with substantial overwatch, and they lost. They lost power for 4 years. So the program itself was successful, but the taint was not. The Contras were tainted with the Somoza angle, the fact that some of them were Somocistas. But that was a minority, and it was primarily the people that had training because they were former military. But the 90%, if not 95% of the Contras out there were just regular civilians, a lot of them peasants that now had to fight for their freedom because they were losing it.
Has the way the government approaches covert actions changed in the years that you've been involved?
Yes, like everything else, you got to grow and you got to adapt, and sometimes you move in the right directions, and others you don't. We had a lot of liberties back then, in the sense of a very supportive political backing, and that is the biggest thing that curtails any covert action program that we may get involved in. Under Reagan, we had such strong support, and after all, our job is to collect intelligence and to do covert action for the president of the United States. That's what the CIA does. So when you have a White House that is supporting you and believes in you and trusts you, it empowers you to go and do better, and it allows you to do better. When that coin is reversed, so is our operation. And the fact that maybe 8 years after 9/11, we started forgetting about 9/11, and it became even more political. Sadly, like the FBI, my agency has been politicized in the last years, and that is so antagonistic to who we are. The first thing that I learned when I was at the farm at the spy school was we don't do politics and we don't do policy. We do collection of intelligence and covert action.
Who's at fault? I mean, you mentioned Reagan as an example of someone you thought was a good president for the CIA. Are there presidents who were particularly bad, or CIA directors who were particularly bad for what you wanted to do?
Well, I think you have the Jimmy Carter years, which preceded Reagan, and that is a stark contrast. I mean, President Carter was a wonderful human being, a very devout Christian, but he was a very naive man, and he was very liberal in his thoughts and naive in understanding that we cannot gauge the morality of our enemy by our own morality. Unless we're as evil as they are, we cannot, do the same. And During Carter, we had Afghanistan, we had the Panama Canal, we had the Iranian crisis where our guys and ladies were held for 444 days, and lo and behold, in comes Reagan, and the day he gets signed in, they release our prisoners. Why? There was a new sheriff in town.
Yeah, you talk. There's this issue between toughness and morality. I was asking a colleague about this earlier. Who said, the Brits will always tell you that before they do a covert action, their last question is it moral? And the Americans, before they do an action, their last question is it legal? Is that true? And what is the role that morality should play in covert actions?
It should play a huge, and it does. I mean, it's not in isolation, but unfortunately, the legalities of things for us is something that we're very vulnerable. Post event, somebody could scrutinize, and if there's been an illegality, you could go to jail. So the lawyers are there to protect us, but our lawyers in the agency are very unique. They, our favorite lawyers is when I was in the counterterrorist center, we had a guy who was the poster child, Doug, and he never said no to anything. But he would say, okay, let's see how we can make this legal and get the right permissions and the right approach and curtail this or do that. And now we can, unleash our dogs of war and go do covert missions legally. The morality permeates the service anyway. We do not assassinate people for kicks. We do not sell drugs in Los Angeles. That is not what the agency does or is.
Zipping forward to the war on terror, you've talked a lot about the extent to which the CIA was really following bin Laden before 9/11. Is there something that we as a nation could have done to prevent 9/11 or to get a handle on him earlier?
Absolutely. When he was in Khartoum, Joseph, in the mid 1990s, we knew what he had for lunch. We had him under close surveillance. We had a very personal friend of mine, Billy Waugh, used to run around his compound taking pictures from a safe apartment that he had above the Bin Laden compound. We knew how many fighters he had. We know what car he drove, and often he went out by himself. We knew the security was a joke for our operations guys to go in there and somehow capture him or neutralize him somehow. And we provided a lot of opportunities to do that, but the political will was not there. And if you imagine if we would have been allowed to somehow neutralize bin Laden as a threat, and again, I'm not saying just killing him, but either compromising him to where he does get arrested, it's a miracle, or we abduct him and bring him to justice in our country. 9/11 probably would have happened, and neither would have the Cole or the African embassy bombings.
I want to jump to a couple audience questions we have here. This is from Christopher Bonavico in California. Can we work with Russian insiders to take out Putin?
Well, unfortunately, that's not a reality. You have to understand that Putin, besides the amount of security that he has, just like our president, the people around him are in the same boat that he's in. They are like-minded and benefiting from that association. It would be very rare to have somebody so patriotic and so anti-Putin that he would have survived the scrutiny that all of us are in our careers. So having the wish that somebody's going to walk up to him and put a bullet in his head, as much as I would dream of that, I don't think it's going to happen because the people around him, if he's dead, they're probably next.
This is from William DeJarnette in Arizona. I guess it's something you've talked a fair amount about. What are the pros and cons of the United States employing drone strikes in foreign countries?
That's one of my pet peeves. It is a tool that we have. You read the book, so you know that I actually did pull the trigger on a very special op, but we knew exactly who everybody in that group was. The problem with the drone strikes is that they always have collateral damage. And what the irony to me is that if you propose a program that says, okay, it's 1939, I'm going to go and I have a way of putting a bullet into Hitler's head, people go, oh no, Americans, we don't do that. You cannot do that. 49-cent bullet. However, we could take a $2 billion missile and hit a wedding to kill Abu and Abu Abba, and everybody goes, "Oh, bravo, we got those two guys," but we killed 6 of his cousins, and now those 6 families are also radicalized. Additionally, when we do renditions or more direct action kind of stuff, we get to exploit the intelligence in the area, the computers, the telephones, all these things are priceless. And if we can capture some of these guys and bring them back, then debrief them. When a drone strike hits, it's all is evaporated, including innocents.
And that gets back to what you were talking about earlier, this fascinating disconnect between the morality of covert operations versus the morality of drone strikes. Do you think that the U.S. would be more popular in the world right now if a lot of things done with drone strikes had been done with covert action?
I think we needed a much better balance. The drone still plays a role, and there are like in the case that I describe in the book, that was a very legitimate target, and it was in Afghanistan, and there were definitely Taliban. We had proven that, and it's a very long story, but we need to have the ability to do covert action at any given time. And one of the programs that I tried to start at the end of my career, or that I started at the end of my career, and didn't go too far other than the approvals and the initial training and surveillance, was to try to be able to preempt and disrupt terrorist activities in the future. What I told our direct lieutenant was, you cannot build your firehouse when your house is already on fire. If I would have had the programs that I was proposing at the end of my career before 9/11, because when 9/11 happened, I was the chief of operations at the Counterterrorist Center. If I would have had that kind of program in place, and we were getting all that chatter from Al Qaeda that we knew they were doing something, but just you could not pin it down. It's not like in the movies. It's not like a puzzle that you neatly put together because you no. It's primarily a puzzle with half of the pieces missing, and you come to to analyze the results and then take covert action. So the drone is still a viable tool to have in our repertoire, but our toolbox also needs people that are willing and able to carry out covert actions, because our country is going to need it at one time or another, and you cannot try to build it once you've been hit.
Yeah, so we're running out of time here. I just wanted to close out by asking, big picture, are we going in the right direction or wrong direction on U.S. intelligence activities now?
I think that the biggest thing obstructing intelligence and the development of intelligence allies is the politicization of things. You know, when people see what happened in Afghanistan, for example, that all of a sudden, after all these years there, we leave people behind that were our allies and that were depending on our safety, for safety, and we leave them behind. How do I go to the next liaison counterpart and go, "Hey, listen, trust me, we got your 6 on this. We will back you. Work with me on this program, and I promise you're going to be better off." And then he's going to look at me and go, "Gee, like you mean like what you did in Afghanistan?" So those political decisions that are made for political gains are very detrimental to both the intelligence community and the law enforcement community.
And unfortunately, that's all the time we have. We'll have to leave it there. Thank you, Rick, so much for joining us and talking about your fascinating book. Again, I'm Joseph Marks. Please check out what we have coming up, all the interviews at WashingtonPostLive.com, and we'll see you next time.